Hello, Garland Nixon here, and we're talking with Francesca De Bardin. Did I pronounce that right, Francesca? De
Close
Bardin?
enough. De
All right, yes.
Bardin.
Oh, De Bardin. Okay. Well, in other words, it's easier than it looks. I overthought it. All right. So let's get going. Francesca has a book, and it's called Moscow Diaries, an American living in Moscow. And she moved to Moscow some time ago, and she's going to share with us her experience, the differences, the things she learned. So, Francesca, let's hear your story about how you came to be living in Moscow.
Well, I left the United States in about 10 years ago, and I moved to France and retired in France, in the south of France. Um, I was quite happy there. It was a small town, and I had been accustomed to living in New York City, where I had businesses and I had a very active cultural life. This town in France was only 30,000 people. And so after a while, it became a little bit boring, and I missed being in a big city. So I was in France when COVID started, and I refused to be vaccinated. That was the first decision I made. And then the French government did everything they could to encourage people to be vaccinated. And they made everyone's life really miserable. Uh, Businesses were going out of business. Hair salons were closed for 2 months. I mean, they did everything to push people to get vaccinated, which I just refused to do. Um, Around 2016, I decided to take my first trip to Russia. I had wanted to visit the Hermitage in St. Petersburg my whole life. So I decided in 2016 this would be a good time to do it. So I went there 2 or 3 times before uh, all of the COVID problems started. And I really enjoyed it. Was a new culture for me. So everything was new. I had traveled around the world and done business around the world, but Russia was a totally different uh, culture. So I did that 2 or 3 times. And then when things in France started getting more and more difficult in terms of COVID, I was getting more and more fed up. And as fate came into my life, my landlord of 8 years announced to me, "We've decided to sell your apartment, so you can either buy it or leave." So I was a bit stunned. And I said, "Well, what am I going to do now? Where do I want to go?" So I didn't want to go back to the US. I did not want to stay in France. I had no desire to stay in Europe. And I was remembering, my good experiences in Moscow and St. Petersburg. By this time, I had met 5 people who were Russians, and I had stayed in touch with them for about 5 years. And I wrote to them, and I said what my situation was. And I said, "What do you think? I'm thinking of moving either to St. Petersburg or Moscow." And they wrote back and they said, "Not St. Petersburg, it's too cold. Move to Moscow. You will love it. It's everything you love, and you should do it." So I said, "Well, why not? Why not? I've relocated in my life many times from California to New York to Paris and then to the south of France." So I said, what better place could I go? I mean, it has everything I love: the opera, the ballet, the symphonies, the art. So I decided to rent a small apartment in Moscow to see how I would feel living there and to get a sense of what life would be like. And so I did that for 2 months, and it was in late fall. After 2 months, I found an apartment and decided this was it. And I went back to France, organized all of my things to be moved, and everything was moved cross country by truck to Moscow. And I arrived January 5th, 2021, in the snow, and set up my home.
And what struck you about Moscow that was different, worse, better than whatever, however you want to put it, than your experiences in New York, in Europe, etc.?
Well, first of all, Moscow is huge. It is a huge city. It's 1,000 square miles, and everything is big. The monuments are big, the highways are big, the sidewalks are big, even the carrots are big. And it was, that was the most shocking part to me, because Moscow, if you look at it from the top, from a map, Moscow is like a big circle. And the Kremlin is in the center. And the Kremlin was founded in the 1300s. So the city expanded out in a circle from there. And now it includes 15 million people. So you have all kinds of different neighborhoods. Everybody lives in high-rise apartment buildings, pretty much. And they have second homes, dachas, they call them, where they go for weekends or for vacations. And so the city sort of empties out a great deal, on the weekends and the holidays. But it was just huge. It was huge. And so I started, my Russian friends said to me, if I only spoke 2 words of Russian, da and yet, that's all I knew. And I had my phone, which could translate for me. And my friends told me, if you need help, look for somebody 30 to 40 years old, because they'll probably speak some English. So that's what I would do when I ran into trouble. And I started writing down all of these experiences that I would have with these Russian strangers. And after writing about 20 of them, I said, this is a book. This is just really incredible. I've never seen anything like it, how these people treat me. They embraced me. They were so kind and so compassionate and so helpful. I had traveled everywhere, and people are always helpful if you ask. But in Russia, they help even if you don't ask. If they hear that you're having a problem, they'll approach you and say, what do you need? So I saw that immediately. But you can visit a country as a tourist, but you really never know the country until you live there. And so that was the biggest surprise to me when I started living there. The biggest surprise to me was the compassion, the kindness, the generosity of the strangers I would meet on the street, who were always going out of their way to help me. But more than just helping me, they would stay with me all the way till the end of my goal, to reach my goal, and they would help me do that. And then they would wait until I actually got in a taxi and got safely on my way. So this prompted me to start wondering, what is it about these people that makes them so kind and so humane and so generous? And so I started thinking about that as I was writing all of these experiences about my my Russian strangers that were helping me. And I called a Russian historian that I had met on a trip and asked her to sit down with me to explain to me how this was happening. Where did this come from? I didn't understand where this kind of compassion came from. And so she spent a few hours with me, and I read her book. And it's a combination of many factors. Russia has been an empire for 1,000 years. It has gone through trials and tribulations, invasions, all kinds of horrific experiences during that time. And the people learned to band together. They needed to support each other to survive. And so there's a sense of companionship and helping each other that goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. That was one thing. The other thing is that the Russian Orthodox Church was very instrumental in supporting this kindness and this need to help each other and to take care of each other and to love each other. So that was a very important driving force in the religion as well. And then the third aspect was the school system. During Soviet times, the children were grouped into two groups, and up until about 14 years old, and they were trained to help each other. That was their goals. They were trained to be kind to each other, to help each other, to help their parents, to take care of the elderly. These were all the values that continued to be reinforced throughout these three very important, critical segments of the society. So I certainly understood that, and I write about that in the book in much more detail than I'm talking about now.
Let me ask you this, something that I find interesting that Americans, that Westerners don't understand. Here, like in the US, oh, well, we hate the government, we don't trust the government, or, oh, we support the government, we don't, the government is a totally separate entity from the people, to be feared, trusted, hated. It seems to me that the Russian people have a very different relationship with their government. If your thoughts on that.
Russians are extremely patriotic. They 80% support the president and the government. It's a we culture. It's about us together. They have been invaded countless times, and that reinforces this we culture. We have to take care of ourselves. We have to support each other, and the motherland is everything. So there are 190 ethnic groups in Russia and many religions that all practice quite freely. But everybody considers themselves Russian first. They're Russians first. And they're extremely well informed as a country, as a people. They have access to every media in the world. They know their history. And it's interesting, there's a Russian proverb that says, measure 7 times before cutting. And every child is ingrained with that from their mothers, from the time they're born. And what it means is It's critical thinking. You have to be critical in your thinking. And Russians are extremely critical in their thinking. They're very skeptical and they check everything many times before they decide.
Interesting.
So,
Continue.
um, Westerners, what bothers me the most about the West is that there is really no information about Russia. 95% of the media for the past 50 years has been negative about Russia, but they don't really say anything specific. Okay, there was communism, all right, but that stopped 35 years ago. But they haven't, there's nothing that they say that's specific. It's just this gray, amorphous blob called Russians are bad. Russia is bad. But they never really say anything specific. What's bad? Tell me something specific. But 95% of the media is always negative. The rest of it is either neutral and very little that's positive. So people don't really know Russia and they don't know Russians. And that's what really annoyed me after I moved here because I realized that this is a very unique culture, like every culture in the world. Germany is different from France, which is different from Spain. Every culture is different, and Russia has a unique culture, and it deserves to be understood and respected. They're human beings like everyone else, but you have to understand it a little bit. And that's why I wrote the book. I wanted people to understand their characteristics, their traits, their values, how they socialize, how they spend their money, how they spend their time. All of those things that the Western people don't really understand or know. And it's a lot of it is very similar to the Western values. The thing that surprised me the most, which I realized when I came here as a tourist, was that the Russian communication style is very similar to the American communication style. Russians say what they think, and they're very direct, which is unusual. I mean, in Europe, people don't do that. In Europe, it's very different. So it was really a relief for me to be able to speak to people directly and have answers.
Yes, I find that also, when there were these various, kind of psychological operations such as Russiagate, or the Russians are trying to some devious and diabolical plot to confuse us or sow discord, having worked with Russians, having experience with Russians for so many years, my first response was that's not Russian culture. The Russian culture is not to come up with some devious, diabolical plan. Ray McGovern, who may know, Ray always says, if you want to understand the Russians, listen to what they say. If you listen to Vladimir Putin, you listen to Sergei Lavrov, they will clearly articulate what they want, what they don't accept, what they find acceptable, etc. And all of this business about the Russians are buying Facebook ads or some devious, underhanded plot is incompatible with the Russian culture and the Russian communication style.
Totally. It's totally incompatible. And but this, this kind of demonization has been going on for 300 years. It started with the British when the Russian Empire started to expand and getting too close to India, which was their crown jewel. The English decided Russia had to be destroyed. And they haven't stopped since then. That's still their point of view. And that's still what they're working on. And the Russians know this. The Russians know this. But you have to remember, the Russian Empire is 1,000 years old. They have had diplomatic relationships with empires and nations for hundreds of years. They know the game. They know the game extremely well, and they know how to play it almost better than any other diplomatic corps in the world. They are masters at it. They're masters at it. And it's always, what can you do for us and what can we do for you? As it should be.
Living in Russia, one of the things that I found interesting is, I go to New York regularly, and it's very expensive. Everything is overpriced. London, a place that I really don't enjoy at all. Again, everything's so expensive. Everything is overpriced. Do you have some cultural things going on? Yes, but the expenses oftentimes for even the cultural events. If you want to go to an opera, if you want to go to a play, it's so expensive that the working poor, oftentimes the working class, can't afford those kinds of things. One of the thing I found interesting about Moscow is that for a city, an international city that offers the things that Moscow offers, how exceptionally affordable it is, and how the cultural events and major events are accessible to everyday people, economically speaking and otherwise.
One of the things that's very different between Americans and Russians is that Russians enjoy the finer things in life, like Americans do. But Russians are not materialistic for stuff. It's not about buying things. They're not really interested in accumulation of stuff. They go for experiences. They spend their money on travel, on spas, on exhibits, on culture, on symphonies, on self-improvement. They belong to gyms. They take dancing lessons. They do yoga. They're much more interested in self-improvement and cultural aspects than they are in accumulating stuff. They're just it's the American was a consumer society. That's what made the country so rich. I mean, it was always pushing, buying something. So, but that's not the Russian value system. They're more interested in experiences and self-improvement.
Yes. Another thing that's interesting, the Americans in the West, when they talk about the Soviet times, it's as if it was just negative, and that the Russian people are all, oh, we're so glad that's over. That was terrible. But when I went to Russia, I saw a beautiful legacy of Soviet times. In a lot of ways, I saw a lot of people that said, okay, that was then and this is now. We're happy the way things are, whatever they didn't. There's some that say, oh, I loved it back then, whatever. You get all of that variance. But there are a lot of beautiful things that people are proud of. And they say, oh, well, during the Soviet Union, I had people tell me during the Soviet Union, in school, even for the little children, again, opera, culture, the arts, these things were very important. And they'll talk about the positive things. It's not as is portrayed in the West that everything about the times of Soviet are portrayed as just pure evil, but the Russians see that as part of the legacy of Russia. That was a period of time of Russia. And all of these things in our history is what got us to where we are today. Your thoughts?
Yes, I read something that someone said, and he said, during Soviet times, we had stability but no freedom. Now we have freedom and no stability. It's been a huge change. And you have to remember, in the 90s, Russia was on its knees. it was almost destroyed. And 25 years later, things have changed dramatically. Things, as you know, um, where Russia is today is it's hard to imagine how far they've come in 25 years. It was chaos. It was horrible. It was horrible.
I think that one of the things that is interesting is the demonization of Russia in Europe is very necessary because, based on my experience, the people in London would be very angry if they looked at the way they live and their standards of living and their costs for food and energy and all the things that they do. And they went to, and there's graffiti and crime all over the place. And they're told Moscow, if they were to go to Moscow, they'd say, wait a minute, I've been lied to. My situation in London is bad, and the people in Moscow are, enjoying a very reasonable life.
Well, it's not just London. I mean, I can tell you, I have never been happier than I am living here. There is no divisiveness, and I don't experience the negativity that I experienced all the time in the big cities, in Europe, in New York. I'll give you an example. If you're out in traffic, and there's a lot of traffic here, people don't honk their horns. They don't honk their horns. They're very polite. Everyone takes their turn, and they're civilized about it. I walk out of my apartment. I can be any place in Moscow. I don't see graffiti. I don't see homeless. I don't see drug addicts. I don't have to worry about somebody stealing my handbag. Russians don't steal. I've left things many times and go back and find them still sitting there. They don't steal. There's not it's very civilized. The word doesn't really capture what I'm trying to express. But when I go outside, I'm not subjected to all the negativity that you're subjected to in most cities. It just doesn't exist. It's clean, it's safe. The metro is immaculate. The trains run, even during rush hour, every 2 minutes, on time. I can't really find anything to complain about in terms of I mean, there's sort of a serenity about it, because you're not bombarded with all this negative stuff visually or audibly. I mean, people are respectful. They don't speak loudly when they're on their phones. They're very polite. So you don't have the constant negative irritations that you have in so many cities. I've met a lot of English people who have moved here and have been here for many years, and they say the same thing. I mean, when people come here, they're shocked because it's just nothing like they expected.
I know I'm not going to say shocked because, I worked with Russians for years in media here and other places, and I had an experience, but I couldn't, as you said, I couldn't have described it. I couldn't have imagined what Moscow was like. I put it like this. And when people say, what do you think of Moscow? I say, it's what we wish New York was. That's the way I put it. It's what we wish New York was. A big
Every
city.
major city.
Yes.
Every major city. In fact, the United Nations in 2022 named Moscow as the best huge metropolitan city for the quality of life for its citizens. That was the UN. And I recently read that a Japanese organization just wrote the same thing. This is a great place to live. I mean, it's 40% green. So you have forests, gardens, uh, parks everywhere, everywhere. And they're constantly renovating and building new ones. So there's always improvement going on.
Something else I thought was interesting that I didn't realize. When I got to Moscow, I thought, well, what's going on? I see these buildings lit up with colors and lights, and people told me that's just what we do here in Moscow. So it looks good, and the city's beautiful at night. And they don't do that here. It's, oh no, it would be too expensive, the energy. And I ride through Moscow, and there's just regular buildings, and they're all lit up, and some have colors, and it's just for the beautification of the city at night.
Well, during Christmas here, it's unbelievable. The lights and the decorations that are everywhere. My apartment is about 100 and it's about 1,300 square feet. My electricity bill is $35 a month.
Amazing. And that's
Yes,
another thing. I've got a picture here that people might want to see. I'm gonna try to show it of Moscow at night during Christmas. Sorry about that.
it's magical.
Yeah, people can see. This is just. I'm going to try to share this. Okay, there we go. So that's a picture of Moscow at night. Just one of many pictures of how they light up the city during Christmas time at night.
Yeah,
Absolutely beautiful.
these kinds of lights are everywhere. They're everywhere. The other thing that people would be interested in knowing, I think, is that Moscow is a city of 15 million. Look at that. Isn't that incredible? It's just incredible. The distributors of electricity for the government are mandated, uh, their profits are mandated. So they are controlled so that they can't raise prices. Amazing.
Just showing some pictures, and you live in Moscow, so this is not AI. They may.
No, it's true. It's true. Look at that. Yeah, it's true. It's accurate. It's hard to believe.
Yes. And when I went, and even when it wasn't Christmas, I mean, that's, over the top, but even when it wasn't Christmas, there are buildings lit up. In that fashion, some not quite as elaborate, but even when I went when it wasn't Christmas, there are buildings there. I'll put it like this: there are things done in Moscow just for aesthetics, just to make things look nice on a day-to-day basis.
They work at it constantly. One of the things that surprised me the most was the playgrounds here for children. I don't know if you had a chance to walk around residential areas, but most people in Moscow live in high-rise buildings. And uh, just in my neighborhood, there's 5 playgrounds for children up to 7 years old. And they're not just regular old playgrounds. I mean, they are all kinds of swings, trampolines, slides, ropes, all different colors, everything for the kids. And there's 5 of them just in my neighborhood. But every place you go, there's
This is
places for children.
this is a playground in Moscow. Just a picture there, so
Yes,
people can see.
exactly. Exactly. They're not all that big, but they certainly are that complicated, even though they might be smaller, but they're amazing.
Yeah, we can see pictures of various playgrounds.
Oh, that's great. I took a lot of pictures of them because I was just amazed.
You see in the winter.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
and so again, that is something, one of the things I complain about here, and that is that, it's, well, we spend all of this money for the military industrial complex, but when you go to the communities, especially the poor communities, the playgrounds are run down, the little basketball courts, they don't even put nets on them. They cost $10. People in the communities have to go buy the little nets for the basketball courts to put them up. They never renovate them. You look at a lot of them, it looks like they were built in the 1960s and have had nothing done. You're lucky if the grass is cut here. So that the money spent for the beautification of the place. But again, this is for children. Just little things like that that make a child's experience of life better.
Of course, of course, and they're everywhere. They're everywhere. Most Russians have live in apartments, and I don't know if you know this, Garland, but during the Soviet times, um, Russians had free living expenses. I mean, they were given apartments for free. Everyone had a home and they had an apartment. When the Soviet Union dissolved, the government gave everyone who was in one of those apartments free title to those apartments. So people continued to live there, or they sold them and they bought something bigger. But that was an incredible thing because their cost of living, they don't really pay for rent unless they want to buy something bigger and newer.
Wow.
And like I mentioned, the electricity, the all of those services are very, very, very minimal. So Russians have a lot of um, disposable income, much more than you would imagine, because they don't pay rent unless they want to, and they usually have sold something else or they're renting something else. So they have a lot of disposable income, and they use that for mostly for cultural activities, for self improvement, for vacations. They do a lot of vacations. They travel a lot. They love to travel. So I don't know how many people have told me how many times they've been to the States and they really loved it. They love Americans, by the way. They
Yes.
love Americans. And they know us from all the films and the soap operas and all the TV shows that they've been watching that we've sent here for the past 50 years. So they really feel that they know us, and they know how we think, and and they appreciate us. They appreciate us. They like our our positive aspects. That's what they love the most. Our positivity.
Um, Food in Russia, the cuisine, the way people eat, what's available in the store. Is it healthy? Is it good? Is it expensive? How do Russians view, connect with food and cuisine from the perspective of healthy eating, from the perspective of the cuisine being part of their culture and art and all of that above, all of the above.
Well, I come from an Italian heritage, and I lived in France for many years. So cuisine is a very important part of those two cultures. In Russia, I've noticed that it's important for certain holidays, and there's certain dishes everyone makes, and there's certain things you always eat, and certain things that are prepared. and those are traditional. But generally speaking, the quality. The thing I have noticed that was also surprising is the quality of the ingredients here is extremely high. They don't allow GMOs here, and everything comes from all over the world. You can get anything here. You can get fresh pineapples. You can get fruits and vegetables I've never seen before from all parts of the world. So everything is available, and in any quantity. I mean, it's all available. It's here. So I don't think that they're passionate about the cuisine as much as as much as French and Italians are. But certain holidays, yes, they do that. But the quality of the ingredients in restaurants, in cafes, you can go. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's fresh, and you never have to worry. I mean, and in terms of restaurants, everything is here. I can get sushi in my supermarket. Uh, there is everything, and all of the different former Soviet republics, they all have their restaurants here. So you can get Uzbek restaurants and every kind of uh, of cuisine that you really want. And there's Michelin star restaurants here as well.
Interesting. And the I wanted to ask you getting around Moscow, whether it's catching a taxi, walking, public transportation. What's the like to how difficult is it to get around? How expensive is it, et cetera, to travel, move around Moscow? And not necessarily. I don't mean for a tourist. I mean the people that live there on a day-to-day basis who have to get to work or go up to a friend's house or out on a wherever they want to go shopping on a day-to-day basis.
Um, Most everyone uses the metro because it is inexpensive. It's less than $1. It goes everywhere. It's safe, reliable, and beautiful. I mean, there's something. If your viewers are interested, they should take a look at the most beautiful Moscow metro stations on the internet. They are incredible. They go back to 1935 all the way to recent stations that have been built, which are very modern. So they're really quite amazing to see. So people are and I personally take the metro. It depends where I'm going. But looking at my map, I can figure out how long it's going to take because every station is 2 minutes apart. So I know, I can take a taxi to the metro or I can take a bus to my local metro and know exactly where it's very easy to get around. Everything, the signage is great and people are very helpful. So it's very convenient and it's a pleasure. I mean, it's really a pleasure. The taxis are very unique and it's wonderful. Everybody has an application on their phone because you can't hail a taxi in Moscow. You have to order it on your app. So what happens is you have an app. The app knows where you are, or you tell it where you are and where you want to go. And then in a couple of minutes or less, they will tell you that here's a car coming to pick you up. Here's the driver's name. And you get to choose how much you want to pay for this trip, depending on the class of car you want, whether economy or economy plus or VIP or whatever. So you get to choose how much you want to pay. You get to know the name of the driver and the license number of the car, and you get to watch the car driving towards you, so you know when it's about ready to come to your door. It's fabulous. There's no guesswork. It's very simple, and they're reliable, and the system works very well. It works very well. I had a wonderful experience once. It was when I first got here, and I had done a major supermarket shop. And as I left the supermarket, it was starting to snow, and I had these two heavy bags carrying. And I realized I had no idea where to call for the taxi because they don't stop everywhere. They usually stop near bus stops. So I realized I had no idea where to go. And I saw a man the right age, between 30 and 40. And I walked up to him and I said, "Excuse me, do you speak English?" And he said, "Yes." And he started telling me about his time in Louisiana and how much he liked it. And then after a few minutes, I said, "Do you happen to know where I can get a taxi? Because I don't know." He said, "No problem." So he went and picked up my shopping bags, gave me his arm. We walked in the snow, and he took me to a place where I could get the taxi. So he asked me my address, and I gave him my phone, but he put my address on his phone. And the taxi came, and he said to me, he opened the door, got me in, and he said to me, "It's paid." And I wasn't sure whether I understood him or not, but I got in the taxi, got home, and I went to pay the driver, and he went, "It means no." And I pointed to the window as if the man was still there, and he said yes. So the man who had ordered the taxi had paid for it, and the driver was honest enough, he didn't ask me for more money in addition to what he got paid. Little things like that every day, every
Yeah.
day.
Yes. I've noticed a very Moscow, the men are very gentlemanly. You know what I mean? In America, the men are, they could care less if, well, get out of the way. Yeah, go to New York, they're screaming, they're trying to push you out of the way. They're trying to get to the front of the line, and they don't care if you're a man, a woman, a senior, disabled. It doesn't matter. I've noticed the men, particularly when it comes to women and seniors, they're very gentlemanly. They're very, if there's a senior who's struggling to get something, three people will come over. It's like they're pushing each other out of the way to help this elderly person who's struggling. The older women, the babushka, the older woman who has the thing over her head. She's, oh my gosh, the people love them. A young woman, whoever is going to come over, carry their bags. It's very, very interesting.
I find that all the time. Men are very chivalrous here in Moscow. Chivalry is not dead. The men are very masculine and the women are very feminine, which is a big difference from the West. It's always happens to me if have my little caddy with my shopping bag. Always there'll be some man who will come up next to me and just grab it and help me take it where I'm going. And he'll just say, "Pomosh, help," and I'll say, "Da, spasiba." But yes, they help you with your coats. They're very, yeah, and I have no trouble if I do it all the time actually. If I'm having trouble crossing a puddle or doing something, I'll see a man and I'll go, "Pamash," and I'll put my arm out, and they'll immediately come over and help me jump across the puddle or do something like that. No, chivalry is not dead here. It's beautiful. And flowers. I mean, flowers, the gifts of flowers are constant. There's a florist on every street here. And the bouquets are huge. They're huge. They give flowers constantly. Constantly.
The last thing I'll say, something you said is very interesting. The men are very masculine, and the women are very feminine. In the U.S. now, every movie, the women have to be. I've said this about Hollywood. Hollywood now is to make the women masculine and the men feminine. The men have to be trans or gay or whatever. Which I've got nothing against trans or gay people. Don't get me wrong. I'm talking about culture, but this is what they just promote. The women have to be more masculine. They're all the police chief. They're punching somebody. They're beating somebody up. They're doing something like that. And the men are the gentle ones with the flowers. There is and it's part of a promoted culture, right? And as I said, yeah, LGBTQ people, everyone, you know what I mean? I certainly do not oppose anyone's rights whatsoever. But my point being, in Russia, it's something very different. In the men really are taught you're a man and the men should be this way, very masculine. The women embrace femininity. The women embrace the things that makes a woman, the strength. It's like here, it's pushed as though if a woman is feminine, that makes her weak. She's weak because she's too feminine. And in the culture in Russia, it seems to me that the women there gain their strength from their femininity. They really embrace the things that women, you know what I mean, that are the feminine side of the world.
I heard a very important politician say this. He said, women are more concerned with justice. Women are highly respected here, both politically and in every way. Motherhood is sacred here. If you're a mother, that's a sacred duty. And people will move out of the way if they see a mother with a baby carriage. The men will move out of the way or help. Women show décolleté, it's fine. Nobody cares. There's another Russian proverb which I love. The husband is the head and the wife is the neck. Whatever way the neck turns, the head follows.
That's interesting. Interesting. I like that. And as I said, you can see it in the culture. It is not a culture where masculinity and femininity, that there's a one-upmanship. Well, the women are below me. It is a one where it's something very different. In an interesting way, the men embrace their masculine position in the world, but they put women on a pedestal, like you said about mothers or the babushka, the grandmother in Russia. The grandmother, the seniors, but the grandmother is put on an extreme pedestal, I think. The older women, the babushka, when you hear the word babushka, people get a smile on their face. And this is the woman that I love, and this is the matriarch of the family. That's really interesting relationship also.
They are. If you go to a Russian home and there's a grandmother and a mother, the present for the grandmother needs to be better than the present for the mother. That's the rule.
Wow.
But the Russian men they never stare at women. It's considered very rude to stare at a woman. So they're very respectful that way. But if anyone tries to attack a woman, they will. They won't survive. They won't survive.
The last thing I'll say is I noticed something, and that the Russian people, I don't know how to put this, are a little shy. Here's what I mean. I traveled around with Scott Ritter and I, right? And, since everyone knows who Scott Ritter is in Russia, everywhere we went. And so we'd walk around the street, and it was interesting. I noticed if for like celebrities and you're in Los Angeles or New York, people are running over, oh my gosh, it's so-and-so. Can I have the people can't have any peace, right? And I noticed with Russia, you'd see people looking at Scott and they'd be talking and they point over there and they smile and they'd look. And every now and then someone would walk over and kind of shyly say, Scott Ritter, I'd like, could we possibly get a picture with me and my family? Just every now and then. But they were very shy and they'd smile and they'd kind of look. and they'd smile and they'd wave or something like that. But the Russian people were not intrusive. It was like they didn't want to intrude on Scott's
Right.
space. But every now and then someone would get the nerve to walk over and say something to him. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, it's a reserve. It's a reserve, which I think is appropriate. I think it's appropriate.
Yes.
I like it.
Well, yes. Well, once again, we've been talking with Francesca De Bardin. She's an American. What do we call you? An expat, whatever, an American. Do you guys have a term? Do you use an expat for the Americans that are living in? Is there a large? Last thing, is there a large community? Do you find is there a lot of Americans in Moscow?
There's more and more coming in. A lot of the Americans who are still here had worked here, and they married a Russian, so they have children here, and they decided to stay. But the most of the Americans that are coming here now are very young men who are pretty much fed up with life in the West, so they're starting a new life here.
Well, I will say this. I met a number of Russian men, and this is not uncommon. And I'll put it like this. Russian women are very beautiful. And I met a lot of American men who moved to Russia, and they fell in love with a beautiful Russian woman, and they fell in love with the culture. You know, once they met the Russian woman, and through her, they got introduced to the Russian culture, and they just fell in love with the Russian woman, and then they fell in love with the Russian culture, and that was it. And I will say I ran into that a lot.
Yes, well, it's a unique culture, and it's a Eurasian civilization. So you have combinations of a lot of Asian aspects to it, which I think a lot of the respect for the elderly comes from that as well. But it's a very tolerant place. It's extremely tolerant and respectful. And like I said, it's a pleasure not to be bombarded with negativity and divisiveness every time I go out. You know, it's great. It's great. I'm very happy here.
It's wonderful. I was absolutely it was just an amazing place. And when I met these men, their friends, and they said, "Oh, you have to meet my wife," and then I'd meet their wife, and she was so cultured, and she was so knowledgeable, and she was educated, and she was, you know what I mean. And I would meet these guys, and I'm like, "Wow, this guy's great." Then I'd meet their wife, and I'd like, my gosh, what a wonderful couple. You know, I experienced that over and over again. And so I was thoroughly impressed by the people of Russia, the culture, everything about Russia was absolutely, I just thought it was a wonderful place. And I had people ask me, well, what'd you think about, America? What'd you think about Moscow? And I said, I could live in Moscow. I said, and I don't like cold. And I said, I used to like Toronto. I used to go to Toronto. Used to like Toronto, not anymore. But I used to say, some years back, I could live in Toronto, except it's a little too cold, so I couldn't live in. And even though Moscow is cold, and I necessarily don't like the cold, the city is so wonderful. That's the first time I've ever said I could actually live in a cold climate, because everything about it's so wonderful that the cold doesn't really bother you. You know what I mean?
It's true. It's true. And they take care of the streets so well, too, on the sidewalks. Everything is cleaned up. So they make it easy. They do what they can.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. I certainly appreciate, taking time out of your busy schedule. I look forward to having you on again and talking more. I will post everyone in the is your book available? Is your book available online?
Yes, it's available on Amazon in English all over the world.
Let me see. I'm going to do this before we go so that people can look on this right on this video. There we go. All right, everyone, you want to know what book you need to buy. You want to find out what's happening and all of that. Look at this. Moscow Diary, An American Living in Moscow. There we go. It is available on Amazon, a paltry $8.99, a great investment. And there you have it. Very, very interesting book. You will be surprised and entertained to learn about the challenges I faced and the new discoveries I made as an American foreigner in this Eurasian nation. This is the story of my heartwarming experience with Russian strangers I met almost daily. I'll tell you startling facts about life here in Moscow that have been hidden from you up until now. There you have it, Moscow Diary, available on Amazon. Make sure you get your book today. Thank you very much, Francesca. I certainly appreciate it. And it was an absolute pleasure meeting you in Moscow. And I look forward to, when I come back, to connecting and hanging out together again.
Yes, I have to take you to some of my favorite places.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. Thanks, everybody. Don't forget, the most important thing that you all can do is share this on all your social media platforms. Thank you very much. We're out.